So welcome everyone at a new webinar hosted by Slimstock. We're going to be talking about a new era of supply chain localization, um, something that's been trending, something that's been talked about a lot. And today I'm going to talk with Chris Lucky, CEO at Simply Home Furniture, about localization and the importance of localization. And of course, the major hurdles coming on your path while trying to localize your supply chain. So a couple of things we're going to be talking about today. We'll talk about, what is localization. There's not one version of localization that is true localization. There are several forms and things that you can take into consideration when localizing your supply chain. We're going to talk about the need to localize, where companies really looking at localizing and having a more local supply chain. What are some of the main drivers, both from a supply risk perspective, but also a customer requirement? Of course, we'll talk about the benefits and the challenges of localization, and we're going to talk about, how do you actually build a local supply chain? What are really the steps that you have to take to get there? What are things you have to take into account? What are things you have to research? So there's a couple of introductions of myself, Slimstock, and Chris and Simply Home. So who am I? My name is Denny Bloom. I'm a senior consultant, supply chain consultant at Slimstock. I'm mainly responsible for new business onboarding onto our software platform. As I'll introduce to you later, we're a software vendor in the supply chain planning space. So yeah, what do I do it and why do I do it? We optimize inventory control and forecasting. So we're demand and supply planning experts, closing the gap between, theoretical academic inventory management forecasting and the actual practical world, which always behaves different than the academia think it does. How do I do that? Implementing inventory management systems, using optimization, talking about knowledge sharing, which this is also a part of. This webinar is a part of our need to share knowledge with the markets, and I do a lot of process design for demand and supply planning at various of our or several of our customers. I've been doing that for about 8 years now with Slimstock. So who is Slimstock? Slimstock is a global provider of inventory management solutions with a lot of local support. We have about 1,200 customers worldwide. We're active in over 50 countries, have offices in about 26, and bringing us very close to our customers, which I think we can argue is also a form of localization that we found the need for. But today we'll talk about supply chain localization and not IT support. So what does our software do? We do forecasting, selling or forecasting what you're going to sell from a location, the inventory management, how much do you need on the shelf to serve your customers, assortment rationalization, which products should I keep in stock, where should I stock them, promotion management, shelf life management, sales and operations planning, product lifecycle management, and order optimization. A couple of big things that are required to get goods from location A to location B, or at least calculating for you what's the perfect and right math behind that. With me today, I have Chris Lucky. Chris Lucky is the Chief Operating Officer at Simply Home, which is a furniture design and distributor. Chris, thanks for being here with me today. Could you give an introduction about yourself, but also kind of talk us through what is Simply Home, what are some of the challenges that you guys are facing, what's your market, things like that.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Thanks, Danny. Thanks for having me on today with you. Do appreciate it, to talk about this really hot topic, especially since the pandemic. It's really brought this to the forefront in terms of localization and the opportunities or the benefits of localization. In the last several years, most organizations from a supply chain perspective is looking at more global supply chain. and now we seem to be reverting back to localization. So I'm really excited to be here and to be part of this conversation. Myself, my name's Chris Lucky. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Simply Home. Simply Home is a design organization that designs flat pack ready furniture. We're an online player. We sell in most marketplaces like the Amazons of the world, the Wayfair's. We any piece of furniture from any single room in your home, including the outside as patio as well. We service, we source, we design and build, sourcing from mostly from Vietnam, from China, from India, where most of our products come from, and then distributed regionally in the U.S. among throughout the U.S., which is the majority of our customers. So that's a little bit of my background. I've been in retail, been in manufacturing, and now in the e-com space in terms of from a retail perspective, and looking forward to really being a part of this conversation, sharing and learning from everybody here today.
Great. Thanks again for being here today. And pretty sure we're going to have some good conversation about localization. So first, what I want to quickly, talk about is, what is supply chain localization? We see that, localization in the context of supply chain, there's I think two sort of schools of thought when we talk about localization. There's the supply side, but there's definitely also the last mile. So typically when we talk localization, there's the element of, on-sourcing manufacturing, which I think has definitely gotten the majority of the attention over the last 2-3 years, especially during the pandemic. We see that more manufacturers are looking at onshoring or onsourcing, meaning producing in North America. In I think the context of Simply Home, what's what are some of the and I know Simply Home has been actively looking at this as well. What are some of your experience with the on-sourcing part? So looking at it from a supply side.
Yeah, no, it's for us and in the furniture industry, it's pretty interesting in the manufacturing. So, some of the trials and tribulations we've been through in the last couple of years with the pandemic is as things get better in the U.S. and in North America in general, you don't see the same trend in the Asian countries, like where we source from, like China and Vietnam and India. COVID, for example, is still very rampant in Vietnam. So customers are back up and ready and ready to purchase, and purchasing power is there in the U.S. But then we don't have the manufacturing capabilities because those countries are still not fully up and running. So some of the issues we're running through is being able to get production, get them producing, being able to have workers back on the plants, being able to produce. And in cases where they were able to produce, because they were sort of controlled environment where workers were allowed to stay and work in a controlled manner, then the freight, and being able to move the freight because the freight is so far away. One, from the availability of equipment to move the freight and get it to the customer, and to the cost. So that's the other element. So, those are the three big challenges, that we have been encountering in the last several months. And those are, the pandemic, and those always existed, just they were amplified because of the pandemic and really brought them to the forefront.
Yeah, the pandemic has definitely caused havoc with, I think, any cross-continental shipping. With, as you said, a different approach to COVID, not only, it not being gone in a lot of countries, but also North America never really having a zero COVID policy, whereas China does try to achieve that, which means, one COVID case in a harbor and your supply is basically shut down for a couple of weeks. So very, very challenging things to deal with. If we look at the other one, if we're talking localization, it's not only a supply thing, it's also that, last mile distribution, getting closer to your customers, so you can respond faster. In the context of, I think, furniture, how has this been affecting Simply Home, and what are, some of the needs to drive this sort of localization as well?
Yeah, it's with furniture, it's big bulky items. Although it's flat pack ready, it's still big bulky items to be able to store. So, one, being able to in furniture, you're looking at it's lumpy demand. Two, it's big bulky items to store. So, being able to really identify and really be able to localize where your demand's coming from, so you can have the inventory as close to the customer as possible. As you know, Danny, the last mile is really customer goes online to place an order for something. There's a commitment to deliver that. Amazon has set the standard, in a lot of cases, you get it within 24 hours. How do you get the product? So it's really about being able to forecast your demand within a regionalized way, so you can have the right inventory in the right place at the right time to service those customers based on those SLAs and those commitments. And you got to have the shortest delivery time to be able to win the customer. That's the key. You can't be delivering 5-7 days later, else the customer is going to go somewhere else for that product. So it's really being able to have the ability to really be able to identify, and so you can forecast, have the analytics and the ability to know exactly what do you need, where do you need it, and how much do you need it, and when do you need it by.
Yeah, there's something that I've seen, and I think that's also there's localization is important. No one wants to wait for a product to actually ship to them for too long. I've I bought furniture online myself. I've not always been happy with some of the delivery times, and I definitely recognize that.
That's because you didn't buy. That's because you didn't buy from Simply Home.
Exactly. No, I did not buy from you, but maybe I should next time. But if we also talk a bit about I think some of the drawbacks of this sort of localization, like I think we can actually talk about the challenges later, but as you said, it's a big bulky product, or I think big bulky products that have not saying that furniture is cheap, but relatively, the ratio of cost versus the actual physical volume of the product is relatively low. For me, that just shouts, okay, lots of cost of storage. Like what's your vision or vision on that? Like, is it just a cost you'll have to eat because the customer would otherwise just not buy it, or is it something you have to be very careful with when designing that sort of last mile localization?
Well, that's the key. That's a great question, right, Danny? The key there is the balancing act of shipping in bulk to a localized warehouse, and then the last mile is where the majority of the cost is. And because you're shipping to end consumer at that point, so the closer you are to the consumer, you'll be able to provide amazing service levels, and more than likely next day delivery, and then you're lowering the cost because you're looking at cost per delivery versus shipping a container to a warehouse in a localized area, a warehouse of product, and then picking and shipping from there. So it's really about identifying and moving bulk freight into a localized warehouse, and then really reducing your cost and allowing the distribution centers to be able to act efficiently and pick effectively, and really, service that last mile. If you have the right inventory in the right warehouse, the cost to get it there versus the cost to get the individual customers, that's a huge chunk of cost. So if you have the right inventory and you reduce that cost versus shipping from a far warehouse, your cost from shipping hundreds of miles away to a customer, there's two pieces. One, you're going to have a long lead time. And the second part is your cost is going to be dramatically higher to ship from further away to the end consumer.
Yeah. No, definitely, and I think one of the other key factors that we shouldn't forget is localize only when it actually makes sense. Looking at your assortment with fast-moving product, you might be able to localize. Some of the slow-moving product, you might still want to centralize in limited DCs to, I think obsolescence in the furniture industry as it's a somewhat fashionable item, right? It's a fashionable product, and having too much, having the same product still next year or the year after, you might actually be having to write it off, which could be a big cost as well. Um, let's talk a little bit more about the actual, the need to localize a bit more. We've already talked a bit about the pandemic. We've seen various supply chain disruptions, but there could also be other real good reasons to localize. What are some of the other elements that are important for Simply Home when trying to either localize the last mile distribution, but also the manufacturing.
Yeah, one of the key things for us at Simply Home, and I think a lot of organizations, even it's been mandated now, you get a lot of government and institutions and all mandating it, is sustainability and decarbonization.
Hmm.
So it's all about being green, and you're looking at, what does it look like in terms of the infrastructure, and what is it doing to the environment. So in the past, it wasn't. It was looked at as and sometimes in silos. Sometimes people were doing whatever they can. Versus now, it's more of a focus on looking at how exactly what are we doing? What are we doing in terms of driving, for decarbonization, sustainability of the environment, being as green as possible. What needs to happen, especially in you look at the industry we're in, we cut down trees to make a lot of our products,
Hmm.
right? Because we need lumber, and so what are we doing to rejuvenate back that the forestry part of it? How are we helping to sustain that? Where is the raw material? Where do we need to move the raw material to?
Hmm.
That's one part. How one the sourcing of it, and then the replenishment of that raw material to make sure we continue to sustain the environment. And then the other part to that is labor pool, the skill set and the labor to actually produce and manufacture some of the things we're making. It's very much in pockets. So it's not, for example, there are certain items we will produce in Vietnam or in China or in India, and the other countries do not have the skill set to produce those items.
Hmm.
Whether it's in metal, whether it's in rubber wood, real wood, or in pine, or even in upholstery. You'll be surprised, right, how geographically those skill sets are not developed as they are in certain areas. So those things are key components in taking into consideration in localization, and how do you move, what do you move, and what can you localize, and where can you localize it. Because at the end of the day, you gotta, as I said, it's not only about cost, it's about sustainability, and it's about decarbonization, and how do you do those things in a way that you're still delivering value to the customer, that they're not overpriced and not overcharged for it,
Yeah,
that you're pricing yourself out of the market.
yeah, and I think if we look a bit more about so not that's pretty much the supply side. If we look at the demand side or the import side of things, I think we've seen we're still seeing a uh, make it in America sort of mentality redeveloping, going against globalization, which I think led to the introduction of more tariffs and taxes. Um, is this something you at Simply Home have been facing as well, or has that been limited to other sectors?
Oh no, definitely. We have certain items we, the tariff out of China is 25%,
Mm-hmm.
uh, versus it coming out of Vietnam or coming out of India. And with the geopolitical situation we're at right now, with looking with what's happening in Ukraine and looking looking at that war and the impacts and the fallouts of it politically, there is some suggestions that even the tariff out of China is going to be higher because of China's stance on where they're aligned, whether they're aligned with Russia or whether they're aligned with NATO. So today we have constraints with freight with tariffs out of China, and we have a close eye on it because there is potential even bigger impacts down the road depending on what NATO and the U.S. decides to do, and is there any further action they're going to take against China depending on how this continues to play out. So yeah, no, it does impact us, and it's something we keep a close eye on, and it does impact where we produce, what we produce. So that's a big factor in our decisions in our production and sourcing strategies.
Mm-hmm. No, it's definitely a big factor in any, I think, trade-off that you'll have to make when choosing your manufacturing locations. If we talk a bit more about I think that the market. So if we look at furniture, it's definitely a market that is, it's not as fashionable as the clothing market, but I think it has some very similar characteristics where, um, um, you know, where it's a fashionable product. What might be in fashion this year is not necessarily going to be in fashion next year, and that combined with having factories, more than a month of shipping out, is that something that's sustainable from that perspective? Can you still have that quick reaction time, changing to customer uh, wishes with those, sort of very sluggish lead times?
Yeah, no, it's a great question on your topic, especially in the fashion industry. We're in the furniture business. Lead times is anywhere from about 4 to 6 months just from production to getting the product to the customer. So we need to be ahead, at least a year ahead in terms of design and new colors and new designs rolling out to the customer. Because then it's at least another 4 to 6 months in terms of finalizing design, finalizing specs with the vendor, finalizing samples, and approving those. Um, but we're a high fashion brand. At any given time, right now as we speak, I've got anywhere from 600 or 1,000 new SKUs we're launching this year that we're bringing in, and that's continuous. Every single year we have at least close to 1,000 to 1,200 SKUs we're launching, but we have a very solid, rigorous timeline, and we're way ahead of time and being proactive in planning those out. And when do we need to have them? Because for example, patio is hitting the shelves now, so we got brand new patio in terms of designs and hitting. If we missed the boat in patio, though, to your point, some of those colors or those designs could become obsolete, and you have to sell them at a markdown price. So it's about in the high fashionable colors, they need to be there in time for those launches. But then we have a number of staple. You have the browns and the blacks and the whites and the staple colors that is continuous. That's part of our core assortment, and that's replenishable items.
Yeah, so you kind of make from an assortment perspective, you make a split between items that you're going to keep in the long run, basically the basic core assortment that's replenishable, forecastable, repeatable business, and there's items that are expected to have lower volumes or more fashionable, might give you a higher margin because of their fashionability. Um, and basically, you kind of need to design different strategies for those pieces of the assortment.
Correct.
Yeah. So we go to our next slide, around the benefits and challenges of localization. I think some of them are pretty obvious. If we order something from Asia, Southeastern Asia, ship it to North America, there's definitely a cost involved. There's containers involved, which are hard to get, or so I've been told. Um, what are in your eyes the biggest benefits from trying to localize? And when I say localize, it doesn't have to be the US or Canada, but it could also actually be, I think Mexico has been a good target market. Um,
Yeah, you have a number of key one here called out, Danny, but one of the biggest one and probably the most impactful is the agility. Is to allow you to be agile.
yeah,
The localization gives you that agility and be able to react. And especially when you talk about, for example, changing trends and being able to really service customers in an effective way and really, optimize your supply chain, reduce shortages and reduction in surplus inventory, and really, as we talked about earlier, really being able to deliver to customers in a really effective way and give you the visibility. When you're localized and you have control and you have that agility, you're agile, you're able to really build up a really competitive supply chain that allow you to react way quicker. And a supply chain that's agile, that you can react quicker, that has great data. You have this ability to data and be able to make data-driven decisions. You're going to win the customer every day, and that's what it's all about. It's about winning the customer and being able to to drive that NPS score up and have that customer coming back. As you know, the cost of winning a customer in today's market is huge. In this digital world, it's getting more and more costly to win the customer. When you win the customer, you do not want to lose that customer. And having a really responsive, agile supply chain really gives you with that's data driven, really gives you an edge on the competition.
yeah, and I think that's key in nowadays markets with customers being unforgiving when it comes to long lead times. So yeah, to talk a bit more about I think there's also an element of greater control and transparency. We already talked a little bit about being sustainable. Um, do you feel you have better insight in the raw materials that you're getting when you'd be producing in a country that's closer by versus a Vietnam versus a China?
You know what the raw materials for us, we don't from a value chain perspective, we let the vendors manage so we're not get involved in managing the raw materials. We have a close eye on obviously the cost of raw materials, what's happening in the raw materials and in that industry, because that's gonna that impacts us. But for us, it's really about really having a close eye on the market intelligence, being able to really understand regionally what's happening, understanding the demand regionally. Either for example, during the COVID, certain parts of the U.S. was impacted differently. So online sales, we see online sales take off in those areas because people can't go shopping brick and mortar. So really having the intelligence, so you can make good decisions and what the demand's going to look like and where you need to move inventory. Have
Mm,
the data and have metrics that allows you to in the control towers to really utilize real time data in those cases, because if you're it can be 6 months later you're understanding what's happening in those regional markets, then you miss the boat. So you need to have real-time data to be able to be agile and to make decisions that really allow you to capture the opportunity in those markets and win the customer.
totally agree. And if we talk about some of the I think the challenges of localization. So I know Simply Home now has roughly two DCs kind of in the process of merging one into a new location. Um, we talk about capital cost, like getting closer to your customer means that you're moving into more urbanized areas, which means the cost of capital, the cost of distribution centers goes up significantly. Is that is that something that you're using in your analysis of, okay, this is where I'm going to put my DC, being close enough to the market, but far enough for it not to be a multi-million dollar sort of investment in terms of capital, or how I simply solved this question?
Yeah, it's a lot more complex than that. It's looking at the overall value chain,
Mm-hmm.
at our sourcing strategy, where products coming from,
Mm-hmm.
where it's coming to. For example, looking at stuff, which ports it's coming to. So, for example, I don't know if you've been keeping abreast of what's going on in the U.S. So,
Mm-hmm.
contract negotiations are coming up for LA ports. So ratification is it's I believe it's the end of June. They're very very far apart. You want to make sure you have your product coming into ports, or looking at areas into ports where it's you're limiting your potential for issues.
Mm-hmm.
Congestion in the last year, in certain U.S. ports, where hundreds of ships were backlogged, couldn't get stuff getting into the ports and getting received. There were a number of pictures. It was even on CNN on how backlogged they were. So my point there is really taking into consideration the overall value chain and the supply chain, and you look at where the risks are and what's the risk your supply chain can tolerate, without impacting the customer. So one is cost, but two is service. And service includes, the lead time, the implication to, how long, stuff getting stuck on the port. And then, where is your distribution centers located, and do they have the skill set and what you're looking for, as I mentioned earlier on, our items are big, bulky items. You need a 3PL, you need a distribution center who has the capability, of dealing with big, bulky items. It's not small packages to handle. So we need, for example, picking. Most times it's a two-man pick. It takes a while to learn the business, to understand the business, and be able to service our customers properly. So it was really, really looking at that overall strategy, starting from all the way back from the sourcing strategy,
Mm-hmm.
looking at the overall value chain, understanding what's your best lead time. And I use the word best there very cautiously, in the sense that it's service as well as cost, and not just cost, and looking at what are the potential, pockets for disruption, and you want to reduce those as much as possible. So you're having a continuously seamless supply chain, as well as give you the ability to be agile. If you locate distribution centers in a certain spot, you want to make sure if a certain port is impacted, you can get to another port and still get your product and get it to your distribution center within a reasonable time, that little to no impact to your customers. So it's looking at that overall value chain, understanding where the failure points are,
Mm-hmm.
understanding what the mitigating strategies are, what are the options, and then what your criteria for success looks like, and then how you design out that value chain to service your business. And I go back to that one word that allows you to be as agile as possible.
Thanks. Very very long answer, but I heard a lot of good points there, Chris. So basically, picking a DC, it's not only a matter of being close to your customers, it's also making sure that you can actually get the product into that DC quickly once it arrives at a port. That port has certain characteristics, so you have to make sure that it's not a port that often gets congested, or faces other issues. So it's a kind of a supply reliability, things you have to take into account. Um, I guess all of that kind of comes with building trade-off calculations, which kind of brings us to our last slide for the webinar. So how do you actually build a local supply chain? I think a lot of this you've already answered before. But from your perspective, what are the key steps in building a local supply chain. Where do you start? What are some of the important, I guess, everything comes down in supply chain to economic trade-offs, right? We have a cost here, we have a cost there. If we do this, this cost is higher. If we do this, that cost is higher. That's what it all comes down to. But for you, what are the key steps to check A? I think A is check if you can go local. There might be good reasons not to do it. And B, if you decide to, for what products are you going to do it, and what are the steps to take?
Yeah, it's a lot of the things we talked about, Danny. It's when you're looking at building out a supply chain, you're looking for scalability and sustainability. So you want to build a supply chain that's robust. You want to ensure that it has the ability to scale. And with the, your part of that is really understanding having a 3 to 5 year sales and operations planning process. Look at, what is the organization vision? What's the strategy? What is the what are the sales plan and what is the growth for the coming years? And what is the value chain required to be able to support that sales plan? And going back to understanding exactly where are the parts in that supply chain that cannot move. For example, if manufacturing needs to be out of China, then manufacturing needs to be out of China. Then you need
Mm,
to look from China, where does your product need to be to service your customers in the most effective way possible.
mm,
So it's you need to understand where the stagnant parts are, and then you need to build around that if those parts are immovable. If you can't move, and right, so it's really understanding those pieces, looking at your labor pool, looking at the skill sets, what's required, and as I said, making sure you look at agility, looking at scalability, and it being a robust supply chain and allowing it to grow. If you're building a supply chain for today, as you can see, what the pandemic has done, it's
mhm,
caused a lot of supply chains to actually explode
mm,
because it was not robust enough or it was not able to be agile and be able to move with the changing trends. So you need to be able to incorporate those things into your supply chain and look at all the
mm,
permutations of what could, what are what if scenario and
mm.
what would be your mitigating plans to be able to address those things as they occur, if they occur, without having to actually shut down your supply chain.
Thanks for the extensive answer. I think we're getting to the end of our content here. Chris, so I want to get a supply, I think a summary for everyone who's joined us. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. There's a Q&A tool available through GoToWebinar. In the meanwhile, so I think to kind of summarize, the discussion about local versus global, there's a couple of important elements that Chris has addressed. If we have disruptions, we have changing customer needs. We need to map, look at the trade-offs, simulate alternative plans, but also we need to think about diversifying our supply chain strategy. So I think there's never one flavor of supply chain. Any company has slow moving or fashionable products that you might run a more agile supply chain for versus the part of the assortment that never changes, that never goes away, where demand is predictable and stable, and you can actually have a slower supply chain that's more bulk driven. Um, so that being said, um, there's a couple of questions from the audience, Chris. I think actually one that I really like that we've not talked about. If we're talking about localization, I think there's an element of change management. What's um, what's your view on change management by from people are, I guess, they're happy with their current suppliers, they have a relationship. There's a DC that's centralized that you've been working with for a long time. There's change management where you might have to switch parties, or you need to start working with different parties. How have you been handling this within Simply Home?
Yeah, great question. I'm not sure the question is meant for with the change management within the organization or with third party providers. I'll try and answer both. That's a great question. Change management is key when you're implementing any major change or disruption in an organization. I think it's one of the elements most organizations undervalue or do not spend enough effort, time, and or cost in really addressing up front and putting. And that usually in a lot of cases is one of the major pillars for failures when you're making major change. So change management is really, really key. And what I find in both cases, both when you're changing things for internal stakeholders, which is employees, as well as for external stakeholders, which might be 3PLs or vendors. It's really about is having them be part of the journey. I've been part of processes in the past, in my past lives, where we've made changes with service providers, and we did what I call term as a lift and shift. So we gave them a process that was not working, and we asked them to do the process the exact same way, but make it successful. And that's a recipe for failure. The process was not delivering because the process was bad. It's not necessarily, it wasn't the people. Changing the people isn't going to fix the problem. So when you're making a change, the people that's involved that you're making the change with, whether it's employees, whether it's a 3PL, whether it's a vendor, you want to make sure that they had some input into what that change is. Because when they have some input into what that change is going to be and what that change is, based on what the desired results you're looking to achieve, there is more buying from those folks and there is more support. And there is more sense of urgency and ownership in ensuring that that change is successful. So the key thing is really, I've seen it more than once in my career, where if you do not have the people who is making the change have some input in what the changes are going to be, usually it's not as successful as it can be. So really have them engage, have them be part of the process. Don't wait till the end game and then tell them what the change is going to be. Have them be part of the change process. Have them have some input into that process. And in some cases, you know what the answers are. You just need to lead them to what the change you're looking for. But at the end of the day, they need to be part of that process. They need to be involved in deciding, determining that change and how the change is going to occur. And that really amplifies the opportunity and really for success and really drives the ownership and getting to the end state way quicker and more efficiently.
Thanks. Totally agree with what you're saying. Nothing to add there. With another question for you, and I think this is also a really good one. I think the general perception is that despite tax and tariff rebates, if you have localized manufacturing within the NAFTA agreement, you're not paying tariffs and taxes when importing or exporting. Um, Still, the perception is that even without those taxes and tariffs, the it's still too much to absorb for passing on the price differences to customers, especially when inflation is at an all-time high. Um, and maybe it's more a marketing and sales question, but I do think it always touches supply chain. How do you test the market and customer acceptance before localizing? Is this something that is actively being tested with the sales team? Are people actually still prepared to pay a little bit more for locally sourced goods? Is it an actual marketing benefit to have it labeled as such? Because I think before you make that decision, you need to kind of test the waters before you build a new manufacturing plant, or so to say.
Yeah, how I'll address that question, Danny, it's the key thing you need to consider, any organization always needs to consider is you cannot pass on inefficiency to the customer. The customer would not tolerate it. the industry would not tolerate, because somebody else will do it better than you will do it if you're trying to pass on inefficiency. So if it's inefficient, it's ineffective, you will definitely lose in the market, because there'll be someone else who will do it better and do it right. So it's not about how do you pass it on. It's about ensuring that you have the most efficient and effective supply chain, that you're not looking to pass on any inefficiencies from the organization onto the customer, because that's a losing battle. You will never win it, not in today's economy. So you have to be as lean and as effective and agile as possible to go to market with the best price possible, because the customer today are too educated. They have access to too much information, and they know better. It's not the 80s anymore, so it's tough to win with inefficiency and trying to pass that on to the customer.
So to summarize, be very careful. Customers will not accept it. But then I think that's the key part of the trade-off calculation that any company should be doing. Like where can we win? Where do we lose at the end? If we look at the entire value chain, can we offer this product for the same price or at a better price than our competitors? I think there's a couple of more questions. Let me just try to read through them. If we're there's a statement here and a question saying that, okay, if we're looking at onshore manufacturers in North America, many are actually parts of a bigger chain. So it's a company that owns the whole supply chain, from manufacturing to sometimes even retail. Are there any constraints on finding manufacturers that are willing to build for you, instead of delivering to part of their own organization? Is there like a shortage of qualified manufacturers in your business?
There is very much so. There is a shortage. There is manufacturers who would in our industry who's looking, who's totally focused on building for the IKEAs of the world. So they want to be building hundreds of thousands of of units of a specific item at any given time. We're a high fashion furniture organization, so in a number of cases we're looking, as I said to you, we're launching closer to 1,000 new SKUs in the next few months, almost every year. So in some cases we're looking for smaller lot sizes. Because we want to be in and out. We want to provide that new fashionable product to the customer, and then 6 months later we want to produce the next new fashionable item for what the customer is looking for. So not necessarily, we're not just a staple run-of-the-mill furniture organization that we just produce the same end table every single day. We do have some of those, but we also want to produce the fashionable items. So there is not as many manufacturers who has the capability to produce what we're looking for with shorter times, as well as to produce them in the lot sizes we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Not having that huge volume makes you a secondary customer of many of those local companies. They'll always go for the big fish, and that's hard to get to that level in a high fashion environment where you're looking at that smaller lot sizes. Because I think there's probably a degree of automation that they could do for the big customers, which offsets some of the labor cost increases. And if you're doing more customized products, that degree of automation will just be harder to implement.
There is one question. There's one last question I'd like to, if you don't mind. There's one question asked about sustainability. Is there an incentive for sustainability? Mm-hmm. What I'd like to say is that, for me, every single day when I come in and we work, and especially in the industry I am in today, looking at building something that lasts. And I'm not talking about the product in terms of the infrastructure. as part of that, when I want to build something that lasts, I'm thinking, what am I doing to the environment as I do that? So the short answer to the question, depending on what's the sustainability thing you're looking at, there, depending on where you're at, there are usually some sort of local or national government incentive for what you're looking to do. But for me personally, I look at how am I leaving the economy, how am I leaving the environment when I'm done for what I'm doing. So am I leaving it? Am I destroying the environment? Am I doing something better for the environment, or am I leaving it a better place from based on what I'm doing professionally and personally as well? So to me, that's more my guiding principle in terms of the sustainability piece. The part of in terms of is there any incentives to do it? That's my biggest incentive. The second, if there's any government incentives in terms of financial remuneration to do it or support to do it, sure, we'll take advantage of those. But that's not the my primary in our organization, primary objective sustainability. We're looking at doing sustainability to leave an environment just as good or better than the one we have based on what we're doing today.
Building something better and building something that lasts. Great final words for this discussion, and thanks a lot, Chris, for being here with me today. I want to thank the audience as well for sitting with us. Everyone will get a follow-up and a copy of the slide deck after, and feel free to contact any of us on LinkedIn, follow me or Chris on LinkedIn, or add us, and subscribe to our newsletter at slimstock.com. So for now, everyone, have a great day, and again, thanks for being here. Chris, thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Danny, and thanks for everyone who joined the call today. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.